Hi,
Hi,
Rabbi.
Shell.
I mentioned this to June as we were leaving since no one else is on right now. But Nancy and I, as you know, go on a lot of cruises, and we went on a river cruise about 5, 6 years ago, right before COVID. And we went with
Hmm.
Sue and Meyer.
Wait a
And
minute.
okay.
I'm not hearing you.
Oh, do you hear me now?
Mm,
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I could hear
Okay.
you.
I just
I
wanted
don't
to
know
say
if Rab-
shalom. So,
Yeah, I don't know if Rabbi was having difficulties hearing us. Can you hear us, Rabbi?
Nope.
No?
we can hear him.
Yeah, we could hear you.
Well, Shell and I can talk to each other until you get,
Okay,
and we can say anything we want now. You can't hear, right?
right.
Now's our chance, Shell.
Right.
Rabbi Papkins seems to be totally spaced out. You look at the look on his face. He obviously can't find some button he needs to find. That's what always happens with this stuff.
I
There's
don't know
some
what the problem
button you
is.
don't know.
I can
Okay,
hear you. You still can't hear us? No.
Can
well,
you hear
Carol
me?
just showed up,
Well,
and
oh,
as usual, I'm getting a great shot of her glasses. Okay, no, now I can see a little bit more. There you are, just
Uh,
a little bit more. There you are, much better.
yes,
Okay.
my phone.
Well, now you're disappearing again, Carol.
Well, because I'm holding a phone and
Well,
it's not.
don't you have a bracket for it or a
No,
holder?
nope, nope. Yeah, there's no steady
you
place.
hear us, Rabbi? No, you still can't hear us.
You can't hear us.
We could hear you, but
Okay.
yeah,
My
Okay.
we could hear you.
Yeah, now my computer audio is working, but it wasn't
Good.
working in my regular system.
Huh. Interesting.
Wait one moment.
Yeah, I don't think Ricky can make it. She had an appointment.
Okay.
Well, we all together have about 10 people who show up from time to time. It's just that they don't hardly ever all show up at once.
Yeah.
Try this again.
Yeah, well, Maddie's away.
Yes,
Oh,
that I know.
Yeah.
okay.
Rabbi Zucker, where's he?
I don't know.
I know where, in the Poconos. Joke.
Yep. Okay.
But can you hear us now, Rabbi Poppy?
Yeah.
I can, but I don't know why my regular sound system isn't working.
But as long as you can hear us and we can hear you, so let's let that
Yeah.
regular sound system go
Yeah.
and learn Torah.
Yeah.
It's not going anywhere. It'll still be there an hour from
Well,
now.
but it's exceedingly frustrating. I'm sorry. Okay, let me start screen sharing. Okay. And then let me.
Yeah, just enlarge it. Enlarge
Yeah,
it.
no, that's what I'm working on now. Yeah, I think that's what we normally use.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay. So, a lot in our parasha. We have the dreams of Joseph, which infuriate his brothers, who already feel out of sorts. They feel their father has a favorite, which he definitely does, in Yosef, and he gives Yosef this ketonet pasim, an ornamented tunic, as the modern translations have it. And uh, then they have the opportunity. Their father, Yaakov, sends Yosef to check on his brothers, and they plot to kill him. But we'll see exactly what happens with that and try and figure out I mean, we kind of know the story. We know that he's sold into slavery in Egypt. The question is, how does he get there? Who sells him? And it's not entirely clear from the text. And what I want to share with you is teaching of my teacher, Ed Greenstein, who just had a piece on this in Torah.com, but also he wrote an article on this many, many years ago. And just he presents a very interesting mode of reading that I think can be applied to a number of different texts within the Torah. But we'll first of all look at this story. Who would like to begin reading?
All right.
Okay, thank you.
They saw him from afar, and before he had gotten near them, they plotted cunningly against him to cause his death. They said, each man to his brother, "Here comes that master of dreams. So now, come, let us kill him, and throw him into one of those pits and say, 'An ill-tempered beast devoured him.' Then we will see what becomes of his dreams."
Hi, Rabbi Zucker. So we have the plot by the brothers. They really want to kill their brother. You get the sense that they deeply dislike him. Um, shall we say?
One might say that.
Yeah. And the plan they come up with, to some extent, is the plan that they will follow when they come back without Joseph and they explain to their father, or they suggest by having a bloodstained tunic. So first of all, we have the plan. They want to kill him. Let's go on.
Reuven heard it and tried to rescue him from their hand. He said, "Let us not take his life." And Reuven said to them, "Do not shed blood. Throw him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand upon him, in order that he might save him from their hand to return him to his father." So it was when Yosef came to his brothers that they stripped Yosef of his tunic, the ornamented tunic that he had on, and took him and cast him into the pit. Now the pit was empty, no water in it.
Yeah, because we're probably talking about some form of a cistern that would normally hold water. Of course, the Midrash says, yeah, it didn't have any water, but it had all kinds of nasty beasts in there.
Scorpions and snakes.
But, pardon me, yeah, scorpions and snakes. Ruvain has a plan. He doesn't, he wants to save his brother. But they're going to throw him into a pit, and what was contemplated as an act of murder will, in fact, hopefully save his life, which it does, but in kind of a roundabout way. We should take a note again on how do we understand ornamented tunic. There's probably more commentary, but I figure that it's safe just to see what Sarna has to say about it. Would you like to go on here, Carol, an ornamented tunic?
Sure. The precise meaning of Hebrew ketonet pasim remains unclear. In 2 Samuel, the garment is mentioned as a distinctive dress of virgin daughters of royalty. Josephus describes it as a long-sleeved tunic reaching to the ankle. In Aramaic and Rabbinic Hebrew, pas means the palm of the hand and the sole of the foot. Radak took pasim to mean striped. The Septuagint and Vulgate rendered the Hebrew a robe of many colors.
Hence the different translations. We always think of it as a coat of many colors. Kind of nice in Andrew Lloyd Webber's Technicolor Dreamcoat, or one of stripes. Modern Hebrew pasim are often stripes.
There are also railroad tracks.
Right. Good. Okay, go on, Carol.
Ancient Near Eastern art may shed some light on the subject. An Egyptian tomb painting at Beni Hassan from about 1890 BCE features a Semitic clan with the men and women wearing multicolored tunics draped over one shoulder and reaching below the knees. Another Egyptian tomb has representation of Syrian ambassadors bringing tribute to Tutankhamun. They are dressed in elaborately designed long robes wrapped around the body and over the shoulders. A mural fresco in the palace of King Zimri-Lim at Mari in southeast Syria shows figures dressed in garments made of many rectangular panels of multicolored cloth. The discovery of a past.
Words.
Pardon me?
Pictures worth 1,000 words. The Benny
Right.
Hassan tomb.
Oh, yeah, very famous tomb painting. Go on.
The discovery of a past garment is in a list of various articles of clothing from the town of Ugarit, dated not later than the 13th century BCE, provides a parallel to the biblical phrase, but little clarification. It may well be that the tunic was a sign of high social standing. It plays a key role in the narrative, both because of the jealousy it aroused and because it was the only means by which Jacob could have convinced that Joseph had been killed.
Yeah,
Convinced that Joseph had been killed.
Yeah. So the Ketone Pasim obviously stands out. It clearly is something that indicates some heightened social status. It's the only other place it appears in the Bible, as it says, for a daughter of a king. And what it actually looked like, we would have to speak to Yaakov's tailor. And since he's not around, we could use all these different tomb paintings and
There's an article in the Torah.com this week that has some suggestions similar.
Okay.
And some Egyptian material that they're citing. Again, it's stripes as part of it, but not just simple stripes. It's more complicated than that.
Yeah, probably perhaps more as they're talking about here. What do they say here? Garments made of many small rectangular panels of multicolored cloth.
Exactly.
That would be Tashbates today.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
So,
that was last year's fashion.
Yeah.
Good show, obviously.
Yeah. So we have Yosef stripped of his garment and tossed into the pit. And of course, this is something that happens to Yosef continually. His shirt is going to be stripped, or his garment is going to be stripped from him by Eshet Potiphar, also in our parasha. And he will be thrown into the pit. He's thrown into Beit HaSohar, but it's also called Bor, clearly trying to connect all of these experiences of Yosef. And then when he's raised up from the pit, he gets new garments. Remember, he gets to be dressed for the king, so it's, very much. And we know elsewhere in the Bible how often clothing indicates status. One of the most famous, because we're coming up to it, the Haftarah for Hanukkah, where in Zechariah's vision, you have the high priest Yoshua, who is dressed in filthy garments indicating Israel's sin, but then in the courtroom scene, the God acquits, makes sure that Yoshua is acquitted, and he's dressed once again in his priestly robes. So the clothes make the man, or the woman, because we have some of those cases as well. Okay, so now we see the wonderful brothers. They've tossed him in the pit, and
they sat down to eat bread.
It's nothing. We got rid of our brother. Now let's just
time for lunch.
Yeah.
No, but I think we should also point out there's two other scenes in Tanakh where people do something about to do something very bloody, or they've already done it, and then they sit down to lunch. This is one. The other one is after Yehu murders Jezebel and the kings of Judah and Israel all in one shot. They all sit down to have a meal. And then after Haman and Achashverosh make the Gezerah to kill all the Jews in Persia, V'hamelech v'Haman yashvu l'shto. And there's no question that at least the Megillat Esther story is being influenced by the Yosef story.
Oh yeah,
Sure.
a lot of similarities between the Yosef story and the Megillat Esther. But clearly, eating is a sign of normalcy.
It's lo
Um,
tochlu ahadam, the Torah says.
you're right, but to but after engaging in such behavior or before engaging in such behavior, that's not so nice. So we get a sense, the brothers are not coming off very well. I mean, Yosef is a bit of an annoying little guy, but
Right.
they're not coming off so well either. Okay, go on.
They lifted up their eyes and saw. Now here a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilad. The camels carrying balsam, and ladanum, traveling to take them down to Egypt. Now Yehuda said to his brothers, "What gain is there if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our flesh." And his brothers listened to him.
Okay, so Yehuda comes up with a plan. Now, how does this relate to the plan that uh, Reuben said before?
Well, Reuven thought he was going to go back and get him.
Right. But now Yehuda, who is, clearly he's concerned for his brother, his flesh, but why should we kill him when we can make some money on the deal? It's
Well,
so
you wonder
touching.
where is Reuben that
He went away.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's another question we have here. Where is Reuben? Reuben was there, and they seem to listen to him because they do toss Yosef into the pit. So they seem to have listened to Reuben. So now, what is Yehuda coming to say? And by the way, there's some very strong similarities in the language. Um, Over here, Vayad al tishlechu vo. Do not lay a hand upon him. Laman hitzil oto miyadam, to save them from his hand. And then here we have Yehuda saying, Lechu v'nim kerenu liyishmaelim v'yadenu, and our hands al tivo ki achinu b'sarenu hu. So there's obviously there's a connection here, but it seems odd. We have some Reuben saying something, and then we have Judah saying something. So that's just like the first thing that may indicate that this is a little bit confusing. Let's go on. Let's do a little bit more, Carol.
Okay. Meanwhile, some Midianite men, merchants, passed by. They hauled up Yosef from the pit and sold Yosef to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Yosef to Egypt.
Okay, what is this verse saying?
They,
it wasn't the brothers that did it. It's
Yeah, it
the devil
sounds
made me.
like
The devil made me do it. It
yeah,
wasn't.
yeah.
You'll
They're
never
sitting there
flip
eating.
Wilson. They didn't have anything to do with it other than putting him in the pit.
Right. Because they're sitting there eating and they don't know that, along comes this hairy group, as just in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat describes them. The Midianites, they come, they haul him up, and they sell Yosef to the Ishmaelites.
Yeah,
So,
but when they arrive in Egypt and Yosef reveals himself to them, he does say, "Ani Yosef achichem asher mechartem oti
yes,
Mitzrayim." So that means that you have to understand this to mean, had it not been for what you did, I would have not been picked up by the caravan.
right.
So you're basically grandma. That's what we call it in the Talmud.
Yeah, and then we'll say Hagrama in one of the commentators. Yeah, and that's part of the thing, because, that's a great point to think of how Yosef
You got the ball
describes how he
rolling.
got to Egypt. First of all, you sold me. We'll come to that in a moment. But how else does Yosef describe how he came down to Egypt?
Hashem was behind it.
Well, Hashem was behind it most definitely. That we'll get to at the end. But how else does Yosef describe it when he's talking to the Sar HaMashkim v'Sar HaTabachim, when he's speaking to Paro's,
I was kidnapped.
yeah,
Tigunov,
Punov
Gunafti,
Ganofti.
Meretz Havrim.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of confusion there. Was he sold? Was he kidnapped? Was he kidnapped and sold? They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but we seem to have different explanations here. And here it seems to be that the Midianites happen to be passing by. They see this guy in a pit. Oh, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites who are nearby. And or could it be the brothers? Anyway, let's go on.
Reuven returned to the pit, and here Yosef was no longer in the pit. He rent his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The child is no more. And where am I to go?" But they took Yosef's tunic, they slaughtered a hairy goat, and dipped the tunic in the blood.
Yeah, so it's not, we don't exactly know the brother's response completely, but certainly Ruvain is like, seems totally unaware of what the Midianites had done. And he said, "Oh my God, this is terrible." And of course, their original plan is going to be fulfilled. They're going to tell their father that he was probably killed by a wild animal, or they're going to suggest that by bringing a bloody tunic. Of course, this ties in with everything else that's going on in the stories. How does Yaakov deceive his father Yitzchak? But by wearing the hairy garments of his brother. And how are they going to deceive uh, Yaakov? They're going to dip the garment in the blood of a hairy goat. So, it just, and then we'll
Punishment
see.
shall fit the crime.
Yeah, and so too, we'll see it with similar types of things in the language of Yehuda and Tamar, which is also in this parasha. Yes, Yehudi?
When you open up your email, all of you, you'll find a photograph of that Egyptian tunic that I
Thank
was
you.
able to copy out of Olam HaTanakh. So you can actually see it the way that Rabbi Zucker described it.
Oh, Toda Rabbah.
Thank you.
That's a very famous, and I'm glad that I didn't have it in electronic format. Okay, so on one hand, it seems that Yosef is saved. On the other hand, the plan of the brothers seems to be working, even if they're a little confused. But now we're going to be confused along with them because what's the next line? Go
Uh,
ahead.
Meanwhile, some Midianite men merchants passed by. They held up Yosef.
We read that already.
Said that already, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Down at the
yeah.
bottom.
Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him into Egypt to Potiphar. I thought it was the Ishmael.
The Ishmaelites,
yeah.
Okay. Pharaoh court
But
Pharaoh's
they're all
court.
sons of Abraham Avinu, and one.
Well, we'll get to that in one of
Yeah.
the commentaries. So basically, as we read this story, there are a lot of elements that are confusing. If not downright contradictory, there's confusion. It's not entirely clear what is happening. And now we're going to take a look at some of the Mefarshim to see how they try and deal with some of this. And among the ideas is what Yehudi had said. I mean, some of their ideas are very good. So first of all, we take a look at what Rashi has to say. Shel, do you want to continue?
Sure. Sure. Meanwhile, some Midianite men, there was another caravan. Scripture indicates that he was sold several times.
Yeah. So Rashi's explanation is, well, it's not confusing because there were a number of caravans and poor Joseph was sold all over the place. One way of dealing with it, it's not overly clear from the text itself, but not too far-fetched.
They hauled up, the sons of Jacob drew up Yosef from the pit, and they sold him to the Ishmaelites, and the Ishmaelites to the Midianites, and the Midianites into Egypt.
Yeah. So here we have a different chain that it's really the brothers.
Hmm.
Vayam Shichu. They hauled him up. It was the
Not
sons of
Vayam
Jacob.
Shichu, Vayim Shichu.
Vayim Shechu, sorry, right. Vayim Shechu. They are the ones who drew him up. So it means that we have to read this verse a little bit differently. So up here, V'avru anashim midyanim socharim, and some Midianite traders, merchants, as they translate here. V'yimshechu v'alu et Yosef minabor, and they hauled up Joseph from the pit. If we're reading this normally, you would say, okay, the Midianites passed by and they hauled up Yosef. But Tanchuma and Rashi are suggesting no, they may have hauled him up, but it's really the brothers who sold him.
Right.
Not as clear. Um, and Sarna brings this out down here. Sarna they pulled. So,
It's potential spam.
pardon
They
me?
I'm sorry.
they pulled out sold. The subject of the two Hebrew verbs is ambiguous on the basis of 45 4-5. And he said, I am Joseph, your brother, who you sold to Egypt. Do not be upset, nor let it be disturbing in your eyes that you sold me here.
Exactly what Yehudi mentioned before, that he's talking to the brothers and saying, "You sold me here," whether they did it directly or indirectly. You sold me here.
It is generally taken to be the brothers. However, if the Midianites and the Ishmaelites are not identical, then it might be assumed that to avoid hearing Joseph's cries, the brothers had removed themselves some distance from the pit while they ate their meal. In the meantime, the Midianites chanced by and kidnapped Joseph. In 40-15, Joseph describes himself as having been kidnapped.
Again, Gunov Ganavti. So, the whole thing is just a little bit confusing.
Mhm.
It's just odd. Okay, go on now with Ibn Ezra.
They passed by when the Ishmaelite merchantmen passed by them. Scripture refers to the Ishmaelites as Midianites because the Midianites are called Ishmaelites. All
Which
right.
they are in Judges 8:24, which we'll come back to in a moment, in Radak's commentary.
Midianite men, these were the Ishmaelites mentioned previously because they were Midianites, and the Midianites are descendants of Keturah. If Keturah is understood to be Hagar, both the Ishmaelites and the children of Keturah are brothers. Even if Keturah is not Hagar, all were still the children of Abraham. Their families intermarried because they were relatives. Therefore, in the wars of with Midian, it says, for they had gold rings, for they were Ishmaelites, judges in 8:24. They called them here Madanim, Midyanim, and Ishmaelites because Medan and Midyan were sons of Keturah. Thus it says here the Midianites had sold him into Egypt. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so basically saying, well, they're, whatever names they're using, it's all the same people,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
one way to deal with all these differences. You have the Ishmaelites, the Midianites, and even then it says the Madanim. What do you mean? Who are they? Probably supposed to be Midianim. And now here's how Radak explains Vayimshechu Vayalu.
They called up.
They hauled up.
I'm sorry. They hauled up.
You call up. You're the gabbai, but they hauled up.
They hauled up. They pulled him with ropes. Joseph's brothers pulled him up and sold him to the Ishmaelites. Reuben was not with them. Perhaps he had returned to his father, or he was shepherding his flock alone in another place.
So that kind of answers your question, Carol. Where was Reuven?
That's a
Well,
little
wasn't
bit
he with
that's a little bit iffy.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
little far-fetched.
It's plausible. It's
Yeah.
perfectly plausible.
all of
You
these
know,
things.
Uriah Gediotai al Mishkanot Haroim. In other words, in Shir Hashirim, it's very clear that shepherds can be far away from each other when they're shepherding, and because
Yep.
each one of them might be responsible for dozens of sheep. So
Hmm.
this is not in any way, far fetched. It's actually probably the pshat. Well, otherwise, how are you going to explain what Ruvain was?
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that there are enough inconsistencies that any of these Perushim could work. The only thing is, if you accept one Perush, you have to ignore the others. Not always, but generally. But
The end of the world.
let's see what Rashbam has to say.
Yeah.
Some Midianite men, while they had been sitting down to consume their meal, having distanced themselves somewhat from the pit, in order not to be guilty of eating while spilling blood,
What what Yehudi had quoted before.
yeah, they were waiting for the Ishmaelites whom they had seen. Before the Ishmaelites arrived, the group of Midianites passed along the way from a different direction, saw Joseph in the pit, pulled him up, and proceeded to sell him to the Ishmaelites.
Yeah, that's very much, if we simply read the text,
Yeah,
that seems quite reasonable.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. One may assume that the brothers had no knowledge of this, even though it is written, who you sold to Egypt. We would have to say that their actions caused the sale of Joseph.
Yes, it's Shehagaramta Maasehem, Shehigramta Hagramta Maasehem, Sia Bemechirato. So, exactly what Yehudi was saying before.
Well, this
Garam
really brings
caused it,
up
even
some
if they
very
didn't do it.
interesting issues too, which is to what extent, let's say today, would you be able to charge them with kidnapping? I
Mm.
mean, attempted murder. What classification would the brothers' crime go into today? I'm not basically answering my own question. I'm just
Right.
setting it up for reflection.
Sure.
Well, yeah, it's a very good reflection. So what are they guilty of? Certainly, rabbinic tradition sees them as having sold them, whether they did it directly or indirectly, because the Haftarah
Yeah,
for
the rabbinic tradition is they're guilty of kidnapping without
Mm.
any answers of buts.
yeah.
Okay, but as a result of the way you're explaining it, according to pretty much following the Rashbam, then we have to think about just what will be how if the prosecutor got hold of them today, what would exactly the grand jury be indicting them for?
So now let's continue with Rashbam a little bit.
This appears to me the deeper meaning of the plain sense of Scripture. For meanwhile, some Midianite men, merchants, passed by, implies that this was coincidental and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. Even if the Torah says that they sold him to the Ishmaelites, that it is his brothers who sold him, we must say that they instructed the Midianite to pull Joseph out of the pit, after which they themselves sold him to the Ishmaelites.
Yeah, so he's going to come up with another,
Mm.
so he offers but all of this points to the fact that the narrative is confused on some level. It's as, and the language is ambiguous, it's a little bit difficult. I
Who
mean,
was what was this Roshbaum? That's
Rashba, yeah, this is Rashbam. This is Rashi's grandson,
yeah,
actually.
right. Okay.
Um, Shlomo ben Meir. And so, all of these things are trying to make sense of all of this. I'm going to bring in, well, let's see, is that next? Yeah, my teacher at Greenstein, who offers another explanation that, in fact, we should not try and separate the different narrative strands of this text, but in fact, we should read it all together.
Okay.
That, we have a tendency in biblical scholarship to automatically, if there are doublets, if there are inconsistencies, if there are contradictions, there's a tendency to say, oh, it's a different source.
Mm.
Well,
And
maybe
I
that's
think,
how these last several verses of chapter 37 are generally treated in critical scholarship
right.
as separate sources,
Mhm.
because of what you just said.
Yeah. But, one of the elements of the documentary hypothesis, and, first of all, we also recognize that well, let me take another step back. The documentary hypothesis, sometimes there was the sense that the redactor is German for editor, just as kind of like a mindless automaton a robot who just kind of threw everything together and didn't really notice or pay attention to, all these surface irregularities, as some scholars call it, these different problems. I prefer the interpretation of Franz Rosenzweig, who said we should not call him redactor, but Rabbeinu,
R
our
stands for
teacher.
Rabbeinu.
Pardon me?
R stands for Rabbeinu.
Rabbeinu, not redactor, but Rabbeinu. Because it wasn't just thrown together haphazardly. And of course, we do recognize that there are many stages. We have a text that probably passed through a number of oral stages and then even a number of written stages. So, I think that everyone recognizes that, in fact, this is, as I always found very funny, Professor Fishbane used to talk about the Bible as a mosaic. You know, we're talking about the Bible as a human creation, but yeah, it's a mosaic. He's saying it is of mosaic origin. Just kind of funny. Anyway, that it's put together from many sources. However, we shouldn't necessarily assume that the person who put it together in the final form, which is the only way we have it, we don't have these individual texts. I mean, I know, Yehudi, I don't know if you've got the Chumash yet, but Torah.com just produced a Chumash that shows all the different documents um, in Genesis, analyze, sets them apart. But we don't really have those texts. All we have is the final written text. And I think it's also why literary strategies for reading Tanakh have become so popular. It's not just that Robert Alter wrote a great book on the art of biblical narrative and then the art of biblical poetry. Um, it's that I think people had torn the text apart in so many ways, and sometimes almost ridiculously, that everyone said, okay, let's take a step back here. What do we have here as a text? Now, this appeals to me as a rabbi because ultimately, I don't necessarily want to give a sermon on the J document. I may. I mean, there's something that could be that something worthwhile in that. We look at these separate documents as a way of tracing the development of Israelite religion. Yeah, so
You get to do it as a book review of the Book of J.
right. Yeah, the book
Years
of
ago,
J.
I did that one.
Yeah, Book of J. This was Harold Bloom, a great literary scholar, did a book trying to analyze the J source. Um, and frankly, it should have been written the Book of B because it was all more about Bloom than it really was about the Torah. But he's a great reader, and
But
I
in
was
that
good
new
too.
edition that you guys, or Rabbi Zucker in particular, was recommending, the Torah Makorotel that came out from the Torah.com,
Yep.
they've got this story is being told in two different colors, you know, and it's not a question of two separate sections. In other words, in the last several verses, you've got uh, chapter 20, verse 24 is in the brownish color. So is 28 and 29 and 36, and the others are in blue. So obviously they're following they're not just giving you raw documentary hypothesis.
Right.
They are giving you a serious analysis of it, but this is how they're coming down to the end.
Yeah. So, I mean, the documentary hypothesis, are those examinations, they're very serious and they are important. But at a certain point, we have to read this as a religious document that comes down to us in a particular way. And here's where
It's
Greek
worthwhile
style.
looking at something like this one, which is by Sidney White Crawford, who did work on the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Oh, uh-huh.
And she shows how there was rewriting
Hmm.
in the Second Temple period, parallels. And the final codification most likely was with the destruction right after the destruction of the Second Temple.
Hmm.
But till then, she suggests that things were still very fluid, and that's why you had a variety of versions.
Yeah. And in fact, by the way Dead Sea Scroll scholars now talk about some of the scrolls is they're put in the classification of rewritten Bible.
Yeah,
You know, you've got sectarian documents, you've got biblical, but you know, it's rewritten Bible. So very clearly, and like I said, I think that there were various oral stages, various written stages.
for sure.
There was unlikely any one authoritative text. I mean, there were certain things that were probably accepted as authoritative, but that was much later. Anyway, what I like is Greenstein's proposal of using a different kind of literary strategy in reading. Um, I'm not sure it's any less speculative than documentary hypothesis, but it's an interesting way of reading. And this is from his earlier article, not the recent one from Torah.com, but his earlier article, an equivocal reading of the sale of Joseph. Um, that's in a book called Literary Interpretations of Biblical Narratives, Volume 2, which mine has fallen apart.
Well,
Uh, would somebody
continue.
like to go
Yeah,
on?
I'll continue.
No,
It,
okay.
in my view, it is the proper role of literary study to enable the reader to experience the text thoroughly, not to explain the text, but to expose it. Taking a cue from Martin Buber, the reader must experience the text not as an objectified, it to be analyzed, but as subjectified thou to be encountered.
This is Barb Buber's big thing, and one of the most famous books is I and Thou, and
Right,
he talks about and you know it's the English translation doesn't really work because in German it's ich und du. Du is the familiar form,
right,
not the formal form, like sie would be formal, or you know I think in Russian also. V is the former,
Yeah, yeah,
and T is, and I
yeah.
think in French as well.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so, but it's the sense that you don't just see something as an object out there, but or a better way he puts it here. I mean, Ed knows this better than I do. Um, you literally experience the text. You encounter the text as it is, not just analyzing it.
right.
But how do you encounter the text? Go on.
Our approach will follow from the premise that a work of art is a systematic whole in which every part functions within the system. The reader of the text must be able to see each meaning producing element in the whole.
Yeah, so it's not just, yeah, we can break it down, but what is the result when it's put together?
Our
How
approach
we have it. Okay, go ahead.
Our approach has been facilitated by the structural analysis of narrative by the late Roland Barthes.
Barth.
Barthes applies his method to the analysis of another biblical narrative in which the readers sense the presence of discrepancies, the story of Jacob's struggle with the angel.
Yeah, it begins with like, where is he? You know, he crosses over the river and then he goes back and he's alone. And you know, it's there are a number of elements that Barth analyzes. Go on.
There, Bart embraces the narrative's ambiguity, which may have come about through the tangling of two versions of the story. He then goes on to show how the narrative proceeds not according to what we would regard as logical sequence, but rather according to the metonymic
Yeah, sorry. Metan
Metonymistic.
Metonymic montage.
montage. The themes are combined, not developed. Meton
Metonymic.
Melodies.
Metonymic logic is that of the unconscious. Such a view is mandated by the presence in the text of a friction between two intelligibilities in the narrative sequence. We may observe a similar montage of narrative sequences in the story of how Joseph was taken to Egypt. Here, too, the reader is manipulated to facilitate between
To
two
vacillate. Yeah.
intelligibilities. This effect has been precisely
May have been.
may have this effect may have been precisely the redactor's intention.
In other words, the redactor is probably
The rabbi.
not probably, but very possibly may have left these seams, these different ways of reading, or the deliberately elsewhere in his article. Greenstein comments, and you can read that little note down there.
Merriam-Webster, is that one?
No, no, that's just a definition of metonymy.
Elsewhere?
Yeah, elsewhere.
Elsewhere in the article, Greenstein comments, yet a structure that is similar to the one we find in the Sale of Joseph episode may be found in the classic film Rashomon, where by the Japanese director Akira Kurosawa. In its core section, the film presents the audience with five conflicting accounts of a crime of passion as told by five characters. Three of them directly involve,
There
and
could be
two of them
involved, yes.
involved, and two of them witnesses. The audience is never given, I guess,
Yes.
given
Sorry.
given the means by which to determine what had objectively
Yeah,
Occurred.
that could be objectively. Yeah, I'm sorry to
occurred. That's
say
okay.
that I've never seen Rashomon. I can't believe it.
I've
One of the
seen
most
it, and
famous
basically,
films.
it's exactly what he's writing there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
I remember seeing it too.
yeah.
yeah. Like,
But I don't think the analog applies. In other words, to compare this to Rashomon is a bit much because Rashomon, each person gives a complete story of what they thought happened, and it's presented visually. But here, none of the strands is complete by itself. The only
right,
way you can put it together is by as in other words, I think what Grinstein is doing here is a bit on the arbitrary side, because essentially what you said, he's saying that this was intentional, but I don't know. It strikes me as basically, first of all, who says redactor's one person or Rabbeinu?
right,
It's a committee like the King James Committee. In other
right.
words, that's much more realistic. I know the Chazal fictionalize it as Anshe Knesset HaGadola. Whatever you want to say, the bottom line is, what the end product is not necessarily somebody sat down and tried to go ahead and put together something that's going to fit Greenstein's criteria of a multi-layered metonymic,
Yeah.
that's pushing it, I think.
That's why I said at the beginning that, his reading could be just as speculative
Yeah,
as,
speculative. That's a good word. Pure
yeah,
speculation.
yeah. On the other hand, and I don't think he's saying it's the same as Rashomon. I think he's saying that the style of presenting a number of things at the same time, that's what's similar. And the fact is, and he brings out in the article, and Bart and other people have written that we have a number of narratives, not just the wrestling match with the angel, but the
Got
rebellion
it
of
with
Korah
Noah.
and Tanya. No, I mean, some things are more clearly different sources, but sometimes it's just like you're following along a narrative strand and then it changes. And then it comes back and then it changes. So there are a number of stories like that in the Bible, which is why I think that
I
Greenstein
call that
suggests.
meanwhile back at the ranch.
Yeah, that could also, yeah.
Touche.
Um, But so first of all, let me just call up, the way he looks at this. Sorry, let me just move this, make this larger. Yeah. So he's showing the different layers, they said each man to his brother, "Look, the old master of dreams is coming now. Come on, let us slay him, da 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 da, and say an evil beast has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." Then Reuben, "Don't spill blood." So, we have kind of this. Um, it was when so you have one narrative strand, but then another one kind of introduces, and it was when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his cloak, um, robe. They threw him into the pit being empty. There was no water in it. Da, da, da. And then now you have kind of a continuation of both those narrative strands when Judah says, "Yeah, why kill him? Let's sell him." Um, and then A continues, they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. But there's a little bit of a conflict because we have the Midianites perhaps doing it. Then coming back to A, they brought Joseph to Egypt. And then the Midianites sold him to Potiphar. But
Rabbi Poppy, you do realize Casuto in his commentary on Brescia in Italian, and which has been translated into Hebrew to a large extent,
right.
essentially says that when you have this kind of situation, it's not by design. What's happened is that there were different traditions as to what happened, and the committee just wasn't able to make a final decision as to which of the traditions they were going to adopt. So they decided to basically just, sort of strand them in with each other. And that's why you get two different stories in Bereshit about how Beersheba got its name. That's why Esau's wives, who they were, depends upon which chapter you're reading. In other words, I think that's a much more superior explanation than what Grinstein's trying to tell us, that this is all being done by design.
Well,
in Grinstein's head, it's by design, but in the committee is not. I mean, my professor at Revel right now, Professor Joseph Angel, he's teaching Daniel, and he gets across the point that even a book like that has all kinds of traditions that got super. In other words, people were very, very reluctant to tamper with what were pretty much, let's just say, to some extent, sacred texts. Okay, in other words, they rather than tamper with one, they just would attach it to another one, which was also considered sacred. And if the end result comes out like something of a pastiche, okay, everyone realizes that, and it's just a question of explaining. But to go ahead and say, I'm now going to take the pastiche and I'm going to read it as if it's intentionally been set up so that you can read all kinds of layers of meaning into it, that's, I think, a little bit much.
Yeah, except for the fact that one, I think overall that it's correct. There's the reverence for sacred texts, that you don't just alter texts. Yes, the idea that even into the Second Temple period, they are a little bit more free with the texts. Even so, there's a great deal of respect for tradition and why many of these things are preserved. However, it's not totally beyond a notion, especially since it happens a number of times in the biblical text, where there could be some intentionality behind it in the work of one of the editors.
Absolutely. I'm not saying that you can't find such things. I'm simply saying that to take that as a default way of approaching a text like this is, I think, pure speculation.
Yeah, I would not
there
take it
are
as
texts where that
default.
would work. I don't think this is one of them.
Yeah. Well, anyway, let's go on to see. Here's what
Why
he
else
says.
would we want to pray for Eliyahu to come and clear everything up?
Right. Yeah. But here this is from his current article, in which I think that he's offering this reading strategy as having a potential theological meaning, which is not, I think, kind of interesting. Do you want to go on as Joseph?
Sure. No. As Joseph explains to his brothers, it was to sustain life that Elohim sent me ahead of you.
Yeah, when he tells them, don't be upset about all of this. This was part of God's plan.
Right. On the theological level, Joseph's descent to Egypt was part of a divine plan to preserve the life of Jacob's clan during a 7-year famine. The double theological message that in spite of appearances, God is both active behind the scenes and working on behalf of Israel is unequivocal. The psalmist combines the human and divine perspectives together in the two lines of one couplet. He, God, sent ahead of them a man. Joseph was sold into slavery.
Yeah.
The psalmist, like Andrew Lloyd Webber in his musical Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, simplifies by citing only one version of Joseph's descent to Egypt, selling rather than kidnapping. But the narrative in the Torah gives repeated expression to two versions, leaving us confused about the human factors, thereby highlighting the unequivocal role of God.
Yeah.
But
I like
but
that.
there's a problem with this. The problem is that if you really think about it, did Joseph have to be sold down to Egypt in order for them to buy food on the Egyptian food market? No. And for that matter, did they have to go down to Egypt in order to basically get still more? No. If they were able to buy it the first 2 years, they could have kept on doing it. In other words, you know, argument that Joseph gives for bringing the whole family down to Egypt is full of holes. Okay. The Haggadah, of course, is trying to basically make it stand up a little bit better. But if you just look at the plain Pashup shot, it's very clear that they don't have to come down in Egypt to feed themselves. What they're going down to Egypt for is to get an achuzah, big heavy estates and God only knows what. All this is coming at the expense of the Egyptian people. In other words, you do have to realize that this whole rationale is essentially a rationale that we tell ourselves in order to make this look better, that we're voluntarily leaving Eretz Yisrael and going into Galut.
I'm not sure I agree with that perspective totally.
Well,
I
the
think it is,
Haggadah definitely does not agree with it, Rabbi Popke.
yeah. But
But the Haggadah is a polemic against the Torah.
yeah, to some extent, I think that all of this is a little bit more complicated, and I also think that one of the things I liked about Greenstein when he's bringing in these various different literary strategies or reading strategies, a better way of putting it, is that we always assume, I'm not saying you and I, but that today we have a tendency to read things according to our sense of genre, our sense of logic, or whatever. Um, but that's not necessarily the same logic that was in place for the ancient authors or the ancient editors. And, this theological message. Um, that, for all of the confusion, God knows what's going on. That's, I think, still a very powerful message. I mean, he talks about it as well in terms of the rebellion of Korach and the Tan and Aviram. There's a lot of confusion there, but at the end of the day, now, of course, that's a polemical tale. On the other hand, at the end of the day, it's Moshe and Aaron are standing there, and then that was God's plan. So I think that there's, I mean,
There are ways of presenting God's plan without hitting you over the head with it.
right,
Two good examples of that are the Eliezer story and the Megillat Ruth.
right, but
Where everything seems to be going on. It's very clear that God is doing everything behind the scenes, but it's never quite stated that way. The difference in this text is Yosef is saying it, and I'm sure Tehillim is just following it. So
yeah,
what you're saying, but that's a very polemical statement. In other words,
okay,
I wasn't kidnapped. I was lifted into Galut, and now I'm dragging all of you guys back to Galut to join me. Excuse me, we can buy food without going into Galut. If we really care about living in Eretz Israel, why are we doing this?
well,
It's only 5 years to go anyway.
it's also,
After the 5 years are over, Rabbi Popke, did they come back? When
no,
5 years of
but
famine expired, why aren't they going back to Eretz Israel? Okay, because Joseph is pampering them. He is essentially trying to create a situation where the whole family is going to be very well taken care of in Galut. And but you do have to realize that's that whole interpretation is not what the text is saying. Okay, that's what Joseph is saying.
Well, that's in the text.
No, no.
You
Joseph is
have
one
Joseph.
person, one take, like you would say about Rosh Hashanah, and I could say that very easily about how you want to
Okay.
take the story.
But I do believe that one, biblical text can be more sophisticated, and one, it could very well be polemic. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not sure that the polemics that you and I see in the text are necessarily the polemics that the biblical authors, editors, readers, whatever, would have seen in the text. And there's another point I wanted to make, and now I kind of lost it. Um, but yeah,
Oh,
I
you,
lost
you
it.
you could you certainly for the time period you could certainly say that there's a large galut in Bavel, and this is being done in Eretz Yisrael, and they're criticizing the galut Bavel.
Very
Yeah,
possibly, but
because
again,
Courage let them
how,
come back, but only 10% of them came back. That's a good point, Rabbi Zucker.
yeah,
But of course, that means that this story is dating from Galut Bavel. I think that's pushing it a little bit, don't you?
it could be or not. But the
I'm
fact
saying the
part of the
basic
problem,
Joseph story as we have it here. I mean, look, the story had to be pretty well known for Megillat Esther to model itself on it. So it's sort of strange to say that the story just first comes out in the end in the Golan period. Of course, according to the book that you showed before, you could say that Yosef saying "Kilu Michyash Lachani Elohim Lefnechem" is a later addition. But once we do that, we're just not going to have a text anymore. You follow what I'm saying? So I think we shouldn't assume that this is trying to. You don't need that. Well, it's always been an issue, isn't it? To the time of Yishayahu ben Amos, there were Israelites scattered all over the world. May Ashur, may Patrosim, may Cushim, may Shinar, may Yayam. You don't need that Galuf. Remember, the Northern Kingdom went into Galuf 140 years before. Okay? So there were Israelites scattered all over the place who seem to have made themselves quite comfortable wherever they were and do not seem to have had any particular interest in going back to Eretz Israel.
yeah. Also, however, I mean, yeah, I mean, I certainly think
We
that there
call
are a
them
lot
the
of
lost
polemics.
10 tribes, but that's not what they were.
Right.
What they were people who basically liked it better where they were than and they had no interest in going back home.
But also, I think at a certain point, if things didn't happen the way they did in the Bible, you wouldn't have a story. The old joke from Two by Two, the musical about Noah. That whole song about the sons arguing with Noah. You've got to have a rudder on the ark, and Noah says, "Why do we need a rudder? God promised that we would survive." And the sons answer, "I don't know, Papa. Why do we need a boat?" Um, it's you look at all kinds of things in whether it's movies or literature, you know, you wouldn't have a story if they didn't do that.
Right.
Like
Oh, Divrei Amim gets along very well without this entire enterprise. As far as Divrei Amim is concerned, the only number of people went down to Egypt were a small group of the Orocontis natives of
right,
Israel that essentially arose in Eretz Yisrael, and the rest of I mean, Divrei Amim has Ephraim living in Eretz Yisrael now. According to the Torah, that would be absolutely impossible. So, there is a different way of presenting things in the Tanakh itself. Forget
right.
about what people came up with afterwards.
Yeah, so I think that, and again, that's something that is written later, and for all of the traditions, kind of Newsnerian approaches to say you can't, it has to be the latest date possible, but as you mentioned before, there is so much respect for earlier traditions. And these things were preserved, whether they were preserved in the same form that we now have them in Tanakh, unlikely. But just because something may have been edited later doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of earlier perspectives and elements that are within the text. But either way, I just threw it out there because I thought this was an interesting way of reading the text,
Yeah.
understanding, just an interesting way of reading in general. Like I said, I mean, any interpretation on some level is speculative.
Right.
So, Midrash most definitely is, but it's very valuable and rich. And so, too, I think that, making us think differently about the text and reading things, and being able to acknowledge the text as it is without just tearing it apart, I think is definitely useful. And again, I still like Greenstein's ultimate message is that, we may not know what we're doing down here, but God knows.
Right.
And God is the one who has arranged everything.
Right.
So, toda rabah, everybody. Nice to be
Shakol
back,
chakara,
learning
bye-bye.
again.
Shalom, stay warm.
Yep. Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Right. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye. All right, let me get out of here. Start that and